Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining
Hi.
us. We're going to go through and just to make sure that as people are joining, we're going to be just making sure your mics are switched off. And that's purely just to reduce background noise so that everyone can have a good audio experience. And then at the end, obviously, if you want to unmic yourself, if you have any questions, then that would be great. I don't know where everybody is joining us from, but I hope you're all experiencing as amazing weather as we are here in the UK. I know we've certainly got, I can see from a few names, we've got some European colleagues and clients with us. We've got some other people, I think, slightly further afield as well. So thank you all for making the effort to join. We'll just give a couple of moments. It's only just hit 12 o'clock for anybody else that's going to be joining, and then we'll make a start. Okay, it's 12:01, so I'm keen that, oh yeah, see, they're all still coming in. Just let a couple more in from the lobby. Brilliant. There's still more coming in. Great. Okay, we are going to kick off because I don't want to be running overtime. So hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. You're obviously joining to hopefully hear about how you can work better with agencies and ultimately get amazing results. If you're not here for that, then feel free to join us and stay with us and enjoy it. But hopefully that is why you're here. I'm going to start off by just giving a little bit of an introduction to who we are, because I know certainly some of the people on the call haven't experienced working with us yet. So I'll give a little bit of background about who we are and what we do. And then we will get really stuck into, sort of, some ways of, how to work better with agencies. So without further ado, I think everybody is now mic'd so that we can't hear you. Great, fantastic, thank you. Right, let's go for it. So how to work with agencies and get amazing results. So first of all, we are an agency called Something Big. We're a creative communications agency. And at the heart of what we do, it's all about making a meaningful difference. And what does that mean? I suppose really it comes down to three things. We want to help create a fairer, healthier and happier workforce across businesses globally. And that is partly why we are actually hosting today's session on how to work effectively with agencies. We do host lots of other webinars. So, dependent on your colleagues and sort of your areas of expertise, whether you're sort of internal comms, marketing, all those sorts of things, we've got loads on offer. So please do follow our company page on LinkedIn, Something Big, and you'll get sort of notified of the latest webinars that are up for grabs to come and join. So I'm going to, first of all, just start off with a couple of introductions. I'm going to introduce myself and then hand over to Rachel. I'm the commercial director at Something Big. I've been here for 10 years this year. I head up our client services team, and essentially I get to interact with all of our customers on a regular basis. I run the team. There's about 12 in the sort of client services team. And it's very difficult for me to stay at arm's length. I do like to kind of get stuck into projects where I can, but that's great because I've been in there. I've experienced the day-to-day of working, within an agency. And whilst I'm not always in so much the day-to-day, I think from the experience I've built up, I've got lots to share with you today. So over to you, Rach.
Yeah, so I'm Rachel Puttock. I'm our client delivery director. I've also been here for 11 years now, so a long time. So I've worked in lots of different kind of guises in the account management client services role, but predominantly in the project management side. So I would lead on some of our more senior projects from a Something Big point of view, but also I have a team of project managers who actually deliver quite a lot of our kind of work and working closely with the rest of Felicity's team.
Fantastic. So let's get stuck in. First of all, let's talk about why it's actually really important to have great relationships when you're working with an agency, because there's no point in just jumping in straight to the how-to. It's kind of like the why, I suppose. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we need to have really good relationships. But I want to initially focus on sort of why agency partnerships can often fall short. And it comes down to a few key reasons, I believe. I think there's multitudes of reasons, but there's a few key reasons, which I'm going to sort of talk through in a bit more detail today. So the first is lack of clarity. This is a big one. I think, as soon as there's any sort of lack of clarity around project goals, it could be the target audience, it can be what are the deliverables, the timelines. All of this can lead to, real sort of, frustration and misunderstandings ultimately. So lack of clarity is the first reason I would say that often these partnerships fall short. The second is respect. I think this is something that is not usually intentional. I don't think anybody sets out to disrespect the other person in the partnership. And this is just, almost like sort of a bit of an offset of both sides being very busy. And it kind of comes down to a lack of communication through, that's how it presents itself. And it then ultimately disrespects each other's time and resources. So for me, there's sort of that respect level of, on both sides that, both people are going to be very busy. And so it's, working and, working around that and making sure that you're clear on how you're going to work together. The next one, I think, definitely for me is access to the right people. If you don't have access to the right people, and this is again on both sides, in fact, all of this, I should say, I feel is on both sides, then this is where problems arise. So, clients, people on the client side, so your side, if you can't reach the right people in the agency, you can get very frustrated if you're just dealing perhaps with like people in client services, you're not necessarily speaking with content or with the creative, and it's sort of really digging deep into a creative discussion, then actually that's going to frustrate you because you'll feel that there's this sort of barrier in between you speaking directly to the people who are working on that. And equally, I think vice versa, if we're not necessarily speaking to the right stakeholders and perhaps people that are necessarily involved in different, parts of the project, that can also, cause a bit of a difficulty. Lack of transparency, I would definitely say, is another issue. I think, this can present itself in so many different ways. First of all, this could be, around resource. It could be around different project challenges. It may be, that actually crucial information on your side is withheld, and again, not necessarily intentionally, or maybe it is intentional, but actually that lack of transparency can often cause issues. And then next on the list, I would say, is detail. So for me, this one is a big one. When we struggle, we tend to struggle, again, on both sides, when there's incompleteness of information. So that could be brand messaging briefings, it could be vague feedback, it could be a lack of reference materials that can sometimes make it more difficult for us on the agency side to understand client vision. Or it might not be necessarily asking the right questions. And then the same on our side, if we're not giving you the detail that you need, it's going to really, cause issues. So if we're not saying to you about specific timelines, about, sort of considerations that we need to have up front, if we're sort of looking at unpicking a brief and not necessarily, going through that detail and asking you for that detail, that's where the issues can certainly arise. And then finally, I would say lack of communication. And that probably encompasses all of the above. We totally get, from our side that our clients are super, super busy. And I think, we can't forget that. And it's really important that agencies don't forget that, because whilst they're living in the moment of a project and wanting to deliver the best piece of work for you, actually, that's probably a really small part of everything else that you're dealing with. So certainly, I think, when proactive communication in particular starts to fall apart, that's where, that can lead to things like missed deadlines, frustration generally, and a more kind of reactive approach to kind of problem solving. So those to me are the main reasons why agency partnerships often fall short. And as I say, all of those I think can happen on both sides. There's no blaming here. This is uncovering actually what is it that we need to, get over and find ways to work around. So if we get it right, what are the benefits? There are some great benefits. The first being better communication and understanding. As soon as we have better communication and understanding, we're going to have clearer expectations. We're going to have smoother workflow, much quicker problem solving. I mean, that all sounds wonderful, right? So lots of great stuff to come from that. Strategic alignment for sure. We ultimately sort of become an extension of your team, and we sort of become more invested in your success if we're getting the relationship right. And again, that can only lead to good things. Proactive and creative solutions. As soon as we get it right, that's when we can bring, really fresh perspectives. We can leverage expertise for sort of really impactful results. The possibilities are kind of endless, I feel, when we get into sort of the creative solutions, if we've got the upfront stuff right. Long-term success for sure. Again, I think if we get the relationship right at the beginning and we continue to invest, and I'll talk more about that as we go through today, loyalty will ultimately build on both sides, and you will build this sort of deeper relationship, which ultimately will bring about continuous improvement for the projects, but equally for the relationship and a better understanding for the business and how we can further support. So how can you ensure that you're setting yourselves up for success when working with an agency? Because as I say, this sort of needs to work on both sides. I kind of think about it a bit like a relationship, and that can be any type of relationship that you like to think of. It can be a romantic relationship, it can be a relationship with a family member or friend. But if you think about any of those relationships, the key to that is really investing and getting to know each other properly. And that's not on that sort of surface level. It's kind of getting much, much deeper. And it sounds really obvious, but it is so often overlooked. And that's kind of why I'm stressing that this is a really important thing. As a sort of agency, we personally insist on running now a ways of working session as part of our onboarding with any new customers. And this is a really great way to drill down to understand things like, how do our clients like to work? What makes them tick? What really sort of, gets their backs up and sort of, makes them frustrated? So that's what we can do. But what can you do? For me, it comes down to really one thing. It's taking the time to understand your agency. And, this is a two-way relationship, and don't just leave it at sort of investing in the relationship up front, as I kind of mentioned a moment ago. That continual investment is what will actually, move that relationship forward by leaps and bounds. So making time for discussions outside of everyday projects, sharing feedback openly and honestly, tell us when we're doing a great job. Equally, tell us when we're not doing such a great job. It's really important that, that relationship is not just at that surface level, that it goes deeper. So we're going to get into a bit more detail about a few things that can really, really help to make a really strong relationship between an agency and a client. And for some of you that have been joining today, I think, you possibly will be in your early stages of your career. And hopefully, some of you will have already been writing briefs, but there will be some good takeaways today to sort of improve those. Equally, I'm sure there's some people that have joined that have just gone, do you know what? I've worked with agencies for many, many years. I just want to get a better relationship. I want to understand how I can get better results from them. So actually, I hope there's some really good stuff in here for you too. So creating a great brief. I think it's fair to say there's no doubt that agreeing the right brief early on is key to any project, no matter the size. So whether you're writing your own brief, whether you're collaborating with other team members, or you're working with an account manager, it's really important to have a solid brief. And although no two briefs are the same, I've never come across two that are identical. There are important things for you to be thinking about, and that, can cover over any sort of brief that you're writing. So the first being, what problems are you trying to solve? If you know that, that's a great starting point. And again, it might sound simple and obvious, but honestly, I've been quite surprised at how many times we work with customers, and when we really dig deep, it sounds like everybody, knows about the brief and thinks they know, and that's including us. And then we kind of just go, but what actually is it we are really trying to solve? Yes, we want people to come to this event, but that's not what we're trying to solve. Why do we want people to come to this event, for example? So what are the problems that you're trying to solve? What are your objectives? If you know this is going to massively help to get to the heart of the project and determine what the call to action is and ultimately what you want people to do. The second is, what are your goals and objectives? What are the key messages? This is ultimately going to really help us to understand what it is that you're trying to get from this piece of work. So similar a little bit to, what are the problems you're trying to solve, but ultimately, what is it you're trying to achieve? And then in terms of the key messages, what is it that you're actually trying to say? And who is it that you're trying to communicate to, which comes into our next point, who is the audience? If you understand those two things, so what are the key messages, this is going to help you to understand what exactly needs to be communicated. And if you understand who is the audience, that's going to really help understand and have huge impact on the type of things like tone of voice, look and feel, all those sorts of things when we start to get into actually creating content and copy. Part of a great brief also is actually understanding and knowing the background. Just knowing things like, has something like this been done before? If it has, did it work? Was it, a success? Was it a failure? Also knowing whether key stakeholders are involved and, if so, who those key stakeholders are, what do they like, what don't they like? Any of that information, that sort of, more widely sort of background information, can really help get your project sort of set up on the right foot and give a lot more success if you get that right. The next point, definitely, this is a key one, and it's funny because we all do dances and agencies and clients around sort of budgets, and I'm just going to call it out today because we have conversations where we go, well, what's the budget? And the client sometimes doesn't know the budget, and I kind of get that, but then we need to just be, more upfront and go, okay, so if we were to say this feels to us like it's going to be around 5,000 or 15,000 or 100,000, depending on what the brief is, how does that feel? We just need to test the water, and we need to have these conversations and not be, and I can say this because I'm British, not so British about not having these open conversations about budget. If we can have some sort of alignment of an understanding of budgets up front, then ultimately it means we can get far quicker to, the right solution, which saves you time and gets the project up and running a lot quicker. And then the final thing, deadlines. Knowing, the deadlines for when you're creating a brief is essential. It kind of goes without saying, but again, sometimes these things aren't always set in stone. They do move, but having any deadlines that, or milestones even throughout the project are hugely important. So I think there's a lot here that, sounds like potentially stuff that you would know, but I think understanding the importance of getting this all up front, it is really important. So I'm going to move on because I'm aware of time. I don't want to go over just talking about briefing. It's a massive part for me, but I'm going to hand over to Rachel and let her talk a little bit more about sort of project management.
Yeah, so when you're kind of working with an agency, there's lots of different elements that come into play to create that kind of strong partnership. So it's all very well having great outcome, like brilliant creative, we're all really excited by it. But if the experience has been painful or it just taints the view of the project completely. So what does project management kind of bring to the table from our point of view? From my point of view, Utopia is you have a brilliant experience, just a great experience from start to finish. So you feel supported and you know what's going on and we're in it together. That is really fundamental. Project management acts as this bridge between agency and project team. So for us, it's creative, it's content, it's production, but effectively we are planning it, we are scoping it, we're monitoring it and ensuring that it works for you. So that is fundamental. So some of the kind of the key things which we need to think about. So why does it matter? Why does project management matter? So there are three kind of little sentences there: on track, on time, and within budget. If we weren't doing any of those, the project would fail straight away. So from a budget point of view, we scope every project. I think Felicity mentioned it a little bit earlier, like no brief is the same. Actually, no scope is the same. So from our point of view, no quotes are the same. So we use a platform There's multiple platforms out there, but we use Synergist, and that allows us to quote, to schedule our work internally, but also to include all of our invoicing pieces. So it's a real-time monitoring system, and it allows us to be completely efficient. So that budget piece is key for you to know that we are looking after it, but also it means we can communicate regularly, quickly, on time, depending on the complexity of the length of the project. We love a timing plan. I, number one, would put one up straight away if I could, but sometimes you don't need real detail. So you might need a very simple Excel, which is kind of a top line detail, or actually it's so complex, it's spanning over a couple of months, you need a Gantt chart, and that's a real more visual tracker. But again, we need that to make sure that the project is going to kind of keep on time. So keeping on time, having timing plans, very important, and kind of keeping everything on track. So we are setting these key milestones, we are keeping everyone accountable, but a timing plan is brilliant if we use it. If we do it one off and then don't come back to it and don't reference it, it's not worth it. So I always kind of say that you need to be regularly in that time plan. You need to be living and breathing it to keep a project on track. So that is kind of the first kind of point. Communication and collaboration. I think we know that it's all about relationship building, but being clear, being confident, that we all understand. I often say to my team, I was like, if you don't understand something, don't be afraid to ask a question. Like, it will get us from A to B lots quicker. So actually having that open conversation, building that relationship, you start to learn more and more and more. So just don't be afraid to ask a question, because if we ask a question, it's because we want to get to the crux of it quickly so we can really help. So make sure that we're kind of completely transparent and clear with any communication. And risks. To be honest, things happen. We're all human. We make mistakes. It's in our DNA, unfortunately. But it's about how we reduce them and how we kind of put up some guardrails to really help us. From our point of view, we really kind of focus on due diligence and proofing at different stages of the process, and our projects. So we do a lot of early checks early on in our creative process. We use a proofing tool. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called Pageproof, which we allow for our internal reviews. So you would never see anything unless it's been reviewed internally. But also by us using this proofing tool, we can add specialists into review projects. So it might be that we've got something around DEI, which is really important, or maybe brand checks. Actually having a brand guardian who really kind of understands and lives and breathes, we might get that person in. So we always make sure that each stage of a project there is a level of due diligence which we've made, because we think it's very, very important. But also I would say contingency planning is a really key area for kind of risk management. We all know, and I'm sure if you haven't been there, it will happen. You have a budget, you've got everything planned, you think it's going to all run to like no issues at all, and then something happens. You need to extend the timing, you need to extend the scope of the project, or you really love an idea but you need a bit more money to actually deliver that idea. All of those things can happen, and you just don't know what point of the project it's going to happen. But I also know if you've then gone, I only have this budget, going back and asking for more money or anything like that can sometimes feel a bit awkward, or you just can't do it. So one thing which we are really recommending is adding that little bit of contingency into quotes up front. So then you don't have to have those awkward conversations. You can actually come back and know that you have a bit of wiggle room, which is really important. So real-time visibility on projects, very key. So I've touched on timing plans, but actually for us, Synergist is a key tool, because I can see how many hours are being logged. I can see how well the project is running, which is really, really important from a project management point of view, especially as you know, you've got key deadlines to hit and budgets to keep. So real-time visibility, if you need anything or you just want kind of confirmation of where we're at in a kind of a project, 100% ask, be upfront, have that communication with your team, and just make sure it's a two-way conversation and two-way street, and we're not hiding anything, because actually they are the fundamentals to making sure that a project will run smoothly. So what does that kind of mean to you? Peace of mind is 100%. Like, if I knew I could have that open conversation, I would feel really, really kind of like on board with everything. So efficiency, everyone is a very busy. We are just in a busy world. So actually, if we can find efficiencies for both sides, 100%. As I said, for us, Synergist really helps us make some data-driven kind of decisions. And then at the end of the day, all of us want brilliant results. We want to kind of get this on track, on time and in budget, and be really proud of the final piece. So I just wanted to kind of delve in a little bit deeper to kind of give you a little bit of kind of insight into maybe what you could have front of mind. So what do we need from you? I've suggested these 3 buckets. So upfront communications, collaboration tools, and I mean being open-minded to something which you might not have used before, but also let's look at processes. Can we streamline it? Is there areas which we can focus on? Like, can we do different things? But by having those open conversations and having them early in the project, it hopes for a normal kind of process which is really, really collaborative. So Felicity mentioned that right at the beginning we might suggest doing a kickoff call. Actually, that kickoff call is just vital. Whether it's an hour, whether it's half an hour, if we can get that in with a verbal face-to-face, that is brilliant, and I highly recommend it. And some of the questions, so Felicity touched on some of the questions she asked, but from my point of view, from a project management point of view, I would ask more kind of tactical questions. For example, like hard deadlines. Like, is there anything we really need to know up front? So we are planning at this timing plan or your project to hit key milestones. So that might be a meeting, might be a launch date. So all of those kind of factors. Holidays. We always forget this. And actually, it's really, really key to actually have when you're away or when we're away, etc., just so you've got awareness, because you will have support. But if that's a vital kind of period when we know that we have to deliver, we need to plot it and plan for it. Also, approval lengths. Some of our clients need a week to kind of review versus some who kind of say, no, do you know what? I'm there. I can feedback within 24 hours, 48 hours. It just depends. But having that conversation now and knowing that up front is really key. Are there any key stakeholders who you need to talk to or be involved at certain points? Because they sometimes don't actually want to be involved in the whole process of a project, but there are key points in that milestone where they need to be kind of included. And normally diaries, review times, they have to be considered, and have to have kind of I call it a special measures put in place for that kind of piece. I love this idea of kind of being open to using different tools, because I think in the last couple of years, we've moved from being just maybe an email communication kind of company to Teams, like what we're doing now. And quite a few of our clients decide that they actually like both kind of different use of tools. So it could be that we do file sharing on Teams, but certain emails need to be communicated via email. Or proofing, like I touched on PageProof. PageProof is a brilliant proofing tool. It's really easy, and actually something which we're going to be sharing out with our clients more and more, because it is a really easy, seamless process. And also you can compare, so you keep it all in one area so it doesn't get lost. So very, very key to, I suppose, be open to trying something different when it's outside of your normal. And it could be that depending on the length of the project, some projects which are quick, easy, in and out, maybe don't require weekly calls or check-ins, but have a think about what is needed for you to feel comfortable for the project. And let's set that up at the beginning. So there are just a few takeaways to kind of think about. And then avoiding the pitfalls. It's really hard, and these things will happen. As I said, like, you just have to take them, be strong, have a strong relationship, and we can normally get through them. So first one, so if we're misaligned on the expectations and communication breakdown, it's a really, really challenging, because we haven't really put in that kind of foundation at the beginning. So it's very key. For us, I would say that kick-off call, number one, or just a conversation to really understand, to define the project. Like, do we understand the goals? Do we understand the target audience? What deliverables are we coming out with? And what timelines do we need to factor and plan to? A top tip I remember, for it was a project I worked on, which was for a kind of a year, but actually we had brilliant timing plans. We had our quote and budget, but actually we added a statement of work. So that is always something which we might suggest if we think there is a complexity to the project which will last a long time. We would maybe add a scope of work. So don't be afraid to kind of question that or ask, do you think we need that? We would always kind of prompt it, but that's something to just bear in mind. Scope creep. The really one is the awkward conversation one. And I know sometimes it's hard, and it's just from both sides. From our perspective, we don't really want to do free work because no one does, because we're in a business. But we've also spent an awful lot of time planning the scope to make sure it is optimum for the piece of work. So let's put down those barriers. Let's just kind of have an open conversation, discuss it up front, be aware of it, make sure it just becomes part of that conversation and it doesn't become awkward. So I mentioned contingency earlier, and I really think that is actually a kind of a safety net. So if you're not offered a contingency from another agency, maybe you could suggest it. But I think it is something kind of key going forward, especially for a kind of a decent kind of project, which could be, like Phyllis said, 10 grand, 5 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is. Just have a think about that.
I think another pitfall that we need to be aware of is that the vision gets lost in translation, and that is something that can happen because, again, we're all human, and we hear things in different ways. So this is something that, touch wood, doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen, and I think we all need to be open to the fact that it can happen. So client briefs and says, this is kind of, what I want, and we go, yeah, we totally get it, or whichever agency you're working with goes, yeah, we totally get it, and gets really excited, and it starts to develop out, and then we present it back and they go, but this isn't what I was expecting. And it's not that the brief hasn't necessarily been read and sort of taken on board, it's that actually we've just interpreted it in a different way. And I think this is a challenge that can often happen. So for me, a top tip here is, especially if it's sort of a new partnership that you're working in, actually put in some really early check-in points to make sure that your agency isn't kind of going off on a slightly different approach to what you had in mind. So I think that's a really good way to kind of go, yeah, we're all aligned. So I don't know if this is a big brochure, for argument's sake, let's just do a couple of pages and, just show you and, see what you think. Or if we're coming up with some strap lines, let's come up with some options. And before we go into, more detail and fleshing out all of the sort of content to follow from that, let's check in, let's see where we're going with that. And I think that is something as an agency we're now really good at doing. But I know that causes a lot of frustration, on both sides, when the vision simply just gets lost in translation. And that's something that, we just have to work through, and that depth of relationship will really help. Another pitfall is what we would call sort of lack of client involvement and feedback. And this comes down simply to this sort of, the fact that you're so busy, and sometimes, you'll brief something and it will be your priority at that point in time. And then there'll be something else that will come in and it will sideswipe you, and you've got to go off and do something else. And suddenly you're pulled off something, and suddenly, we don't have that interaction with you as much as we would have. And I guess that's life. And these aren't things necessarily that we can always prevent, but we need to all be able to know how to best react. And my top tip here is really for you to just try and build in time to keep going back to, make sure that you're not completely sort of, dropping off from a project, because otherwise the agency will tend to kind of, try and keep the momentum going. And sometimes that's when it can go a little bit wrong. I think the other sort of point around this comes down to having kind of clear points of contact is a really good thing to set up. So if you know you're going to be really busy a lot sort of across a few different projects, maybe just set a 15-minute or a 30-minute call each week to kind of check in with the agency. And then that just keeps things moving really smoothly, and can help on both sides for sure. The next pitfall would be communication silos, which kind of follows on a little bit from this. I think information gaps can sometimes occur, sometimes when key stakeholders, for example, that are being brought in at different points in the project, haven't necessarily sort of heard the sort of work that's happened, or been aware of what's been going on to date. Perhaps they're not sort of kept as informed as they need to be. And again, it comes down to miscommunication, and slow feedback loops as well. That can also stall progress. So couple of top tips on this one. Establish a comms plan. So when you're starting out working, on a project with an agency, internally for yourselves, have a bit of a communication plan as to who you're going to bring in at what time. Share that even with the agency. That's really helpful. Make sure, as Rachel said earlier, that you're really clear on like what communication channels you're going to use, and have kind of designated points of contact on both sides. And regular check-ins, I kind of already said that, but really, really helpful. And if you've got a good relationship, you're going to want to communicate regardless of how busy you are. So to me, it's, again, comes back to just really considering the relationship outside of just getting that project done.
And we said unrealistic deadlines, but I think it's just deadlines in general. Just think like, is there too tight? Have we got enough time to do the work? If we're squeezing ourselves really quickly, you're going to not get the best work. It's going to feel rushed. It's going to be lower quality. So it's actually having a real kind of think about what I'm asking for, and have I allowed enough time for it? So be upfront with those timescales. Sometimes it's absolutely achievable, but sometimes for the actual ask, you need to just be considerate. Buffer time. If you can add a bit of buffer time, just add it in, because it could be that little thing for that unforeseen thing which you just couldn't see it happening from a challenge or a revision. A stakeholder might have a comment. These things happen, but just remember, be upfront, be clear. I think be transparent, and that's normally the key, and we can help kind of move those deadlines around.
And the final pitfall, I would say, is actually selecting the wrong agency in the beginning. Now, a lot of agencies, will be upfront, and if you go to them and say, can you work with us on this? And they'll go, actually, do you know what? We could, but we're probably not going to do a great job. And that's the kind of agency you're looking for, that is going to be really open, honest, transparent about where they're kind of where they're great and where they're not so great. But selecting the wrong agency can, basically cause a lot of issues. And I think, I think there's a question actually that's already come through about how to select the right agency. So when we get into questions in a moment, I'll give sort of some thoughts around that. But just really make sure when you are looking for an agency that, you know, you're really clear on what it is that you're looking for. Recommendations is definitely the way forward. Go for an agency that has been recommended, and ask to see work that they've done that's similar, so that, you know, that can give you the confidence. So in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to whiz through some quick takeaways with Rach, and then we're going to just take any questions. So super quick, 5 takeaways that you can implement straight away.
So make sure you know what you're asked for. If you don't understand it, to be honest, we won't either. So number one.
Second is just, you know, take the time to really craft a really powerful brief. And I always say to clients that we're working with, take as much time and care over that brief as you want us to be putting into that project, because if you take the care up front, that is going to give us everything that we need to do a really strong and great outcome in terms of the project. Number 3 is build a partnership. I think I've probably said that quite a lot in the last 40 minutes. But yeah, don't view your agencies as suppliers. You know, make them a partner, invest the time, and that's when mutual trust can really kind of, you know, come about, and that's when you get really outstanding results.
And prioritize project management. Like, don't see it as an afterthought. Work collaboratively with your agency, and that will actually help everyone be on the same page.
And finally, Rachel kind of just touched on it briefly anyway, but what we call client-side clarity. And that is, you may well understand what you're asking of the agency, but think of all of your stakeholders, and do they really understand? So for me, it is the crucial kind of part of this is everybody involved in the project, especially the person that's briefing, really understands the project's goals and kind of the desired outcomes. So yeah, if you're taking a brief from a stakeholder and you're briefing that into an agency, make sure that you're not just allowing yourself to be the middleman. Really understand it, really understand what it is they're trying to get out of it, and that will really help the situation when you come on to brief the agency. So couple of things that may help you. If you want a briefing template, we have one which has loads and loads of things to think about, which will help you craft the most amazing brief ever. If you want it, please type into the chat function briefing template, and I'll personally email that to you afterwards. The other thing, if you've got a bit of a brief, but you know that actually maybe you haven't quite sussed out what you want as the outcome, or you haven't quite sussed out, you know, how is this, you know what you want to achieve, but you don't know how, I'm really happy that you just book a briefing session with me, and I can help you shape that brief. So I'm really open to it. You know, you can scan the QR code and you'll get into my diary, and you can book yourself a appointment. You'll get half an hour and we can thrash it out. And I would love to do that and to help you. So on to Q&A. There were a couple of questions that actually came in early. So the first question was, what's the best way to kick off a relationship with an agency? I think we've possibly covered that in what we said anyway. But if you can get face-to-face, that is my number one. Obviously, there are, you know, issues if you're working in different countries. That's not necessarily the easiest thing. But, you know, video calls, just investing the time upfront before you even get into the projects is so important. How to best measure return on investment was another question. I think that, if I'm brutally honest, really depends on the project that you're working on. The biggest takeaway and sort of how I'd probably reply to that is there are lots of different ways to measure return on investment. The important thing is right at the beginning is to be considering return on investment, because again, that is something that, you know, a lot of people fall foul of. I would say when they're briefing, they're all very excited about, oh, we're going to get this campaign out, and, you know, this is what we want to go out and achieve, but we don't necessarily actually talk about measuring return on investment. And so I would say that is part of the briefing. And, you know, if you've got a brief that's kind of being structured at the moment and that's what you're struggling with, book in a call with me and I can help with that. Rachel, there was a question about tools that we currently use for project management. I think you've covered it, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to shout about.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, Synergist is the one which we use, but Also, there are elements into Synergist which are kind of added extras. So Kanban we use as well, which has a little feel about Trello. So personally, I've used things like Monday, Trello throughout kind of my career. I have found the key tool is it needs to be easy and simple to use. If it's complicated, it adds more time, then it's not the right tool. So you've just got to work with what can kind of fit into the project. So I would say just be kind of sensible on that perspective. For us, Synergist works because you can see everything from a real-time point of view and everything's linked, which gives me the clear clarity that I need from a project management point of view. So.
And the final question that came in earlier on was, what are the key factors in selecting an agency to partner with? For me, that kind of comes down to three things. I would say recommendation. If you get a recommendation, I would probably, well, personally, I would always rather go for recommendation than just Google and hope for the best. I think when you're actually choosing an agency to partner with, relationship is really important. So, and that's going to be very surface level at that point in time, but just chemistry. Like, do you get on with these people? Can you actually see yourself working with them, having hours of conversation, emails, brainstorming, whatever? I definitely feel chemistry is a massive part. And also, have they done stuff like this before? Can they demonstrate similar styles of work? Do they make you feel excited? Do they show creativity and flair? Do they sound like they actually care? Do they, really sort of want to dig deep and, understand things properly? Or are they kind of just going, oh, it sounds like a bit of an exciting brief and, we can probably just knock it out and, that's a bit more sort of, money in the part of the end of the month. For me, it's all those sorts of things, which kind of contribute to selecting the right agency, and give them something small to start with. Don't go in with something big. Just give them something that they can just do. And in fact, we had this with a client that we've just started working with, and in fact, I think I saw one of them join the call earlier. But yeah, just give us something small and just let us show what we can do, and then we can move on to the bigger stuff. So baby steps. I'm going to open the floor up. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask off the back of what we've been speaking about today? Feel free to come off mute, or you can type into the chat, whichever you prefer. And if there's no questions, I'll take that we've given a great understanding to you all as to how you can have a really great relationship with an agency. But seriously, if there are any more questions that come about after today, please do reach out to us. Rachel and I are both on LinkedIn. Anybody that's asked the briefing template, you'll get my email address anyway. But yeah, it was lovely that you all joined. Thank you so much. Go and have some lunch if you haven't already, and hope to see you on one of these webinars again soon.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thanks so much, Felicity. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.